The president attracted the ire of some when he announced that the United States will no longer fund the World Health Organization. Let's take a listen.
Today, I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. Many countries said we're going to listen to the WHO, and they have problems the likes of which they cannot believe.
Director of Communications for the Trump campaign, Tim Murtaugh, joins us now via Skype for more on this and on the Trump campaign strategy against presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Great to see you, Tim.
Good to see you, Tim.
Good to see you all. Thank you very much.
So we saw the first ad against Joe Biden that really focused on his attitude towards China. How much do you expect China and our relationship with that country to be central to the campaign this time?
I think it's going to be a very important message. And I know that everyone should be aware of Joe Biden's history of being too cozy with China and going soft on China. And it really begins with saying that they are not an economic threat, which is either willfully ignorant or just inept to say that China is not economic competition for the United States. And then he doesn't want to when the president wants to implicate China in the outbreak of the coronavirus, which is an obvious fact. Joe Biden says that such concerns shouldn't be talked about and are xenophobic. When the president wanted to limit, and did in fact limit, travel from China at the end of January to try to stem the flow of the virus to the United States, Joe Biden called it xenophobic, and it was reactionary. Now, of course, a couple months later, he decided that he was in favor of that because he saw that it was working and he needed to try to get in front of the parade. And again, the name Hunter Biden keeps coming up. We know that Hunter Biden got a sweetheart investment from the Chinese-owned national bank, the state-controlled bank, just after he had traveled to China with his father, who was then the vice president of the United States. So again, with Hunter Biden, the question is, what did China think that they were getting when they were throwing piles of money at the son of the then vice president of the United States? And so this will absolutely, the relationship with China will absolutely be a big issue in the campaign.
Right. And Tim, I saw the preview of that in Axios, and I saw this morning that a super PAC, which of course I know you have nothing to do with, is doing a $10 million buy, testing this specifically in these battleground states. When talking about China, though, is it going to be as much about coronavirus? Is it going to be about industrialization? What's the core message that the campaign is trying to drive home whenever it comes to China?
I think it's both. We know that what has gone on here on the world stage regarding the coronavirus and China's responsibility for that, and the reluctance of Joe Biden to actually call China out. But also, the president everybody who runs for president, or at least has run for president over the last many decades, has campaigned on saying that they're going to get tough on China. But no one ever did until Donald Trump came along. He stood up to China. He knew that they were ripping us off and had been ripping off the United States for decades on trade issues, cheating and stealing technology and forcing the transfer of technology. And the president stood up to that. And Joe Biden and all of the rest of the Democrats said that that was the wrong thing to do. And Joe Biden even said China is not an economic competitor of the United States. He said it over and over again on the campaign trail. And so it's going to show Joe Biden's poor judgment. It's going to show his family's financial intertwining with China and their dependence, Hunter Biden's dependence on China for income, lots and lots of income, by the way, at a time when his father was the vice president of the United States. This is going to be a very important issue in the campaign. It's one of Joe Biden's many, many vulnerabilities, but it's a big one.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And these are issues that we've tackled on this show. I think you probably know that, we're fairly sympathetic to the line of argument that you're making here about our country's relationship to China. But you do have Asian Americans who have justifiable concerns about sort of that xenophobia and racism bleeding into their treatment in this country. Is that something that you think about and that you weigh in the way that you talk about these issues?
Well, certainly, and the president has been very clear in that when he's very concerned about the health and well-being of Asian Americans, just as he is for all Americans. He's talking about actual bad actions by the Chinese Communist government. We've got to be able to call out other nations when they are bad actors on the world stage. China as a nation and their communist leaders have been ripping off the United States for decades. And we now know without question that China lied to the world in cahoots with the World Health Organization regarding the outbreak and the origins and the actual threat and the virility of this virus coming out of Wuhan, China. And so, yes, the president is very concerned about the fact that Asian Americans should not bear the brunt of that. But we as a nation have got to be able to call out other nations on the world stage when they are bad actors.
Tim, just to switch gears a little bit, we saw yesterday that polling coming out of Arizona is looking favorable to Joe Biden. This goes, obviously, would change the electoral map and the electoral calculus for the Trump campaign. What is the plan to boost the numbers up in Arizona, which is a bit of a surprise to some electoral observers?
We're not concerned about those public pollings. We know what we see internally, and the president is in solid shape in Arizona and in a lot of other states, and also in states that were won by Hillary Clinton in 2016. In places like Arizona, the president's message of job creation, look, he's the guy who built the American economy up to unprecedented heights before it was artificially interrupted by this coronavirus, and he is clearly the man to get us back to that position again. The president's protection of American jobs, again, we go back to standing up to China. Latino voters, which are significant in Arizona, in our internal polling, Latino voters very much support the president's tough stand against China on trade issues. And we know that contrary to what some may think, and Democrats, I think, make this mistake, they think if you just say the words Trump and immigration, that automatically wins the argument with Latino voters, and it does not. If you ask a Latino voter, hey, you or members of your family came to this country and became American citizens legally and went through the right process, do you think that other people should follow the rules too? They overwhelmingly say yes. So the president's hard line on immigration policy and his dedication to enforcing the law actually resonates with a lot of Latino voters. The president's going to be just fine in Arizona.
I think that community is a lot more diverse and heterodox than people give it credit for as well. At the same time, we took a look at Nate Cohn, I'm sure you saw, did a deep dive into the polling thus far, and the New York Times basically said, look, this is a pretty close race right now. Yes, Joe Biden overall in the public polls has a national lead, but number one, that hasn't been put through a likely voter screen yet, and number two, in the battlegrounds, it is much closer. He also pointed out, and this is what I want to ask you about, that the composition of the electorate and their affinity, Republican versus Democrat, has continued to change. So even though Joe Biden has sort of a better brand vis-a-vis the white working class continues to shift to the Republican Party, while suburbanites, especially suburban women, continue to shift to the Democratic Party. What is your analysis of how the electorate composition may be different this time around versus in 2016?
Well, I think, let me talk about the white working class and union workers there. Joe Biden is going to somehow try to campaign as this blue-collar hero, Joe from Scranton, when in fact his record absolutely belies that. Here's a guy who was the chief cheerleader of TPP during the Obama administration, and he voted in favor of NAFTA. Those are two notorious job-killing trade deals that union workers hate because it cost them jobs. Their jobs went overseas in NAFTA and would have gone overseas in TPP if President Trump didn't get us out of that. So Joe Biden is going to have a real problem in the so-called Rust Belt states, from Pennsylvania out to Michigan and Wisconsin and all those places where President Trump won last time and will do even better the second time around. And Joe Biden last night in one of his fundraisers that had a pool coverage said that he, according to his data, that's where he's strongest. I don't know what dream world Joe Biden is living in, because that is clearly a weakness, because people know that Joe Biden is weak on job creation issues and the policies that support jobs across those states. And I would remind people that looking at these polls right now, here we are about 7 months ahead of the election, we haven't even yet begun to define Joe Biden as our opponent. We've only just now got him singled out as the probable opponent for President Trump. Joe Biden has not tangled with Donald J. Trump in a general election just yet. We haven't even begun to define him. And believe me, when that happens, these numbers will change.
Well, we'll stay tuned and we'll continue to get updates from you, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, guys. Stay safe.
See you later.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.